The first message arrived on a Tuesday morning, and it felt like ice water down my spine. I was sitting at my desk, coffee still warm in my hand, sunlight streaming through the window in soft golden lines. My phone buzzed, and I glanced at it absently, expecting a work email or a text from Daniel. Instead, I saw a message from an unknown number. No name, no profile picture, just words that made my heart stutter. "You don't belong in this family. Leave before you ruin everything." I stared at the screen. My breath caught somewhere between my chest and my throat. My first thought was that it was a mistake, a wrong number, someone's drama bleeding into my inbox. But the words were too specific, too pointed. I set my phone down, told myself it was nothing, and went back to work. But my hands were shaking, and the coffee tasted bitter. The second message came that night. Daniel was in the shower, and I was curled up on the couch, scrolling through my phone without really seeing anything. The notification lit up the screen, and my stomach dropped before I even read it. "He deserves better than you. Everyone knows it." This time, I couldn't brush it off. This time, the words burrowed under my skin, sharp and venomous. I felt exposed, like someone was watching me, studying me, cataloging my weaknesses. I thought about telling Daniel, but what would I even say? Was someone sending me vague, cruel texts? He'd tell me to block the number, to ignore it, to not let it get to me, and maybe he'd be right. Maybe I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew this wasn't random. Someone wanted me to feel small, unwelcome, and afraid. And they were succeeding. The messages continued over the next few days, each one more pointed than the last. They came at odd hours, early morning, late at night, during dinner. They were never threatening in an overt way, never explicit enough to justify panic, but they were relentless. They chipped away at me, piece by piece, until I started second-guessing everything. Was I too loud at family gatherings? Did I say something wrong? Was I really not good enough? I stopped sleeping well. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, reaching for my phone, checking for new messages like I was addicted to my own torment. Daniel noticed I was quieter, more withdrawn, but I told him I was stressed about work. It wasn't entirely a lie. I was stressed, just not about work. And then, one evening, as I sat across from Patricia at yet another family dinner, I felt her eyes on me. She was smiling, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her posture perfect. But there was something in her gaze, something cold and knowing, that made my skin crawl. It was the same feeling I got when I read those messages, the same chill, the same unease. I pushed the thought away. It was paranoid, irrational. Patricia was many things, but she wouldn't stoop to anonymous harassment, would she? The breaking point came on a Sunday afternoon, in the quiet stillness of our living room. Daniel had gone out to run errands, and I was alone, scrolling through my phone with a growing sense of dread. Another message had arrived that morning, and this one was different. It wasn't vague or abstract, it was personal. "You'll never be part of this family. Daniel will see the truth eventually." I felt something inside me snap, not in anger, but in clarity. This wasn't random. This was deliberate. Someone close to us, someone who knew me, was doing this. And I needed to know who. I'm not a tech expert, but I'm resourceful. I started researching, diving into forums and articles about tracing anonymous messages. Most of what I found was technical jargon that went over my head, but I kept digging. Eventually, I stumbled across a thread discussing IP tracking and reverse lookups. It wasn't foolproof, but it was a start. I took screenshots of every message, noting the timestamps and patterns. They always came during times when Daniel wasn't around, when I was alone or vulnerable. That felt intentional. Whoever was doing this knew my schedule, knew when I'd be isolated. I reached out to a friend from college who worked in cybersecurity. I didn't tell her everything, just that I was dealing with harassment and needed help identifying the sender. She walked me through the basics, explaining how to request data from my phone carrier and how to use online tools to trace the number. It felt like learning a new language, but I was desperate. I needed answers. The process took days. I filed requests, waited for responses, and cross-referenced information. I felt like a detective in my own life, piecing together clues that most people would have ignored. Part of me wondered if I was going too far, if I was letting paranoia consume me. But every time I doubted myself, another message would arrive, another reminder that someone wanted me gone. And then, finally, I got a hit. The IP address associated with the messages was registered to a residential location. My hands trembled as I typed the address into Google Maps, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The screen loaded slowly, agonizingly, and when the image appeared, I felt the room tilt. It was Patricia's house. I stared at the screen, my mind racing, my chest tight. It couldn't be. It didn't make sense. Patricia was calculated, controlled. She wouldn't risk something so blatant, so traceable. But the evidence was right there, undeniable and cold. I felt sick, not just because of the betrayal, but because part of me had suspected it all along. The knowing looks, the pointed comments, the way she always seemed to be watching me, waiting for me to fail. She didn't just dislike me. She hated me enough to try to drive me away. I sat there for a long time, my phone clutched in my hand, my thoughts swirling. I thought about Daniel, about how this would destroy him. I thought about confronting her, about demanding an explanation. But more than anything, I thought about how small she had tried to make me feel, and how I refused to let her win. I didn't tell Daniel right away. I needed more than just an IP address. I needed proof that would stand up, evidence that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. Patricia was too smart, too composed. If I confronted her without concrete proof, she'd twist it, make me look paranoid or vindictive. I'd learned enough about her by now to know that she always had an escape route. So one became methodical, clinical, even. I started documenting everything. Every message, every timestamp, every detail. I created a folder on my laptop, password protected, filled with screenshots and notes. I felt like I was building a case, and in a way I was. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about protecting myself, my marriage, my sanity. I reached out to my friend again, asking her to help me verify the connection between the IP address and Patricia's household. She was hesitant at first, sensing that this was more personal than I'd let on, but she agreed. Within a few days, she confirmed what I already knew. The messages had originated from Patricia's home network, consistently over the course of weeks. I also started paying closer attention to Patricia herself. At family dinners, I watched her. I noticed how she'd glance at her phone, how her expression would shift just slightly when I seemed upset or withdrawn. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. She was enjoying this. She was watching me unravel, and it gave her satisfaction. That realization hardened something inside me. This wasn't just cruelty. It was calculated psychological warfare. And I wasn't going to be her victim. I consulted with a lawyer quietly, discreetly. I didn't mention names or specifics at first, just asked hypothetical questions about harassment, cyberstalking, and what legal recourse might exist. The lawyer was straightforward. If I had proof, I could file a police report. If the harassment continued or escalated, I could pursue a restraining order or even press charges. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. I had a plan now. I had options. I wasn't powerless. But there was still the matter of Daniel. He loved his mother, trusted her, and believed in her goodness despite all the evidence to the contrary. Telling him would shatter something in him, and I hated that. But I also couldn't keep living like this, constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next message, the next attack. I decided to wait just a little longer. I wanted everything in order, every piece of evidence, every legal option, every possible outcome anticipated. When I finally told Daniel, I wanted to be uncheckable. I wanted him to see the truth, not through my emotions, but through cold, undeniable facts. In the meantime, I stopped responding to Patricia's provocations. At dinners, I smiled politely, kept my answers short, and gave her nothing to latch onto. I could see it frustrated her, the way her smile would tighten, her eyes would narrow. She was losing control of the narrative, and she knew it. One evening, as I was leaving their house, Patricia followed me to the door. She touched my arm lightly, almost gently, and leaned in close. "You seem tense lately, Sarah," she said, her voice syrupy and false. "Is everything all right?" I really looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel afraid. I felt powerful. "Everything's fine, Patricia," I said, my voice steady. "Just taking care of some things." Her smile faltered, just for a second, and I saw it uncertainty. Fear even. She didn't know what I knew, but she sensed something had shifted. Good. Let her wonder. I told Daniel on a Saturday morning in our living room with sunlight streaming through the windows and the evidence laid out on the coffee table like pieces of a puzzle he didn't want to solve. He looked at me like I'd just told him the earth was flat. Confusion, disbelief, and then slowly, painfully dawning horror. "My mom?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You think my mom has been sending you these?" I didn't answer right away. I just watched him pick up the printed screenshots, the IP trace, and the lawyer's notes. I watched his hands shake, watched his face go pale, watched the foundation of his world crack beneath him. "I don't think, Daniel," I said quietly. "I know." He shook his head, stood up, and paced. "There has to be an explanation. Maybe someone hacked her Wi-Fi. Maybe, Daniel." My voice was firmer now. "Look at the timestamps. Look at the patterns. Every message came when I was alone, when you weren't around. She knew my schedule. She knew exactly when to hit me." He stopped pacing, his back to me, his shoulders tense. I could see the war happening inside him, loyalty to his mother versus the evidence in front of him, love versus truth. "Why would she do this?" he finally asked, his voice breaking. "Because she never wanted me in this family," I said. "Because she thought if she broke me down enough, I'd leave. And then she could have you back all to herself." He turned to face me, and I saw tears in his eyes. "I need to talk to her." "Not yet," I said. "I filed a police report yesterday." The silence that followed was deafening. He stared at me, and I saw 100 emotions flash across his face: shock, anger, betrayal, fear. "You ... what?" "I filed a report for harassment and cyberstalking," I said, my voice steady even though my heart was racing. "I gave them everything, the messages, the IP trace, the pattern of behavior. They're investigating. Sarah, that's my mother, and she's been terrorizing me for weeks, Daniel." My voice cracked now. The emotion I'd been holding back finally breaking through. She made me feel unsafe in my own life. She tried to destroy our marriage. "I'm not going to apologize for protecting myself." He sank back onto the couch, his head in his hands. I wanted to comfort him, but I also needed him to understand. This wasn't about revenge. This was about boundaries, about refusing to be a victim, about standing up for myself when no one else would. The police contacted Patricia 2 days later. Daniel was there when they showed up at her door. He'd insisted on being present, though I think part of him still hoped they'd find nothing, that this was all some terrible mistake. But Patricia's face when she opened the door and saw the officers told him everything he needed to know. She tried to deny it at first, of course. Claimed she had no idea what they were talking about, that her phone must have been compromised, that this was all a misunderstanding. But when they asked to see her devices, when they mentioned the IP trace and the evidence, her composure cracked. Daniel told me later that she'd looked at him, really looked at him, and he saw something in her eyes he'd never seen before. Not remorse, not shame, but anger that she'd been caught. She'd done it, all of it. And she wasn't sorry. The fallout was swift and brutal. Patricia was charged with cyberstalking and harassment. The case didn't go to trial. Her lawyer advised her to accept a plea deal, which included a restraining order, community service, and mandatory counseling. The restraining order meant she couldn't contact me directly, couldn't come within a certain distance of our home. It meant, effectively, that she was cut out of our daily lives. Daniel was devastated. He withdrew into himself for weeks, barely speaking, barely eating. I gave him space, but I also made it clear I wasn't going to apologize for protecting myself. I loved him, but I wouldn't sacrifice my well-being for his comfort or his mother's manipulation. Slowly, painfully, he began to understand. He started seeing Patricia for who she really was, not the loving mother he'd idealized, but a woman who'd been willing to destroy his marriage to maintain control. He started remembering all the times she'd undermined me, all the subtle cruelties he'd dismissed as just her way. He started, finally, to choose me. We went to therapy together. It wasn't easy. There were sessions where I cried, where he cried, where we both sat in silence because there were no words for the betrayal we both felt. But we worked through it. We rebuilt trust, brick by brick, conversation by conversation. As for me, I felt something shift inside. I'd stood up for myself in a way I never had before. I'd refused to be pushed out, refused to be made small, refused to let someone else's cruelty define my worth. I'd taken back my power, and it felt like exhaling after holding my breath for years. Patricia sent Daniel a letter a few months later. I didn't read it, but he told me the gist. She was sorry he was hurt. Sorry things had gotten out of hand, but she still believed she'd been doing what was best for him. Even in her apology, she couldn't admit she'd been wrong. She couldn't see me as anything other than the enemy. Daniel threw the letter away. We moved to a new city 6 months later. A fresh start, away from the shadow of Patricia's influence, away from the family dynamics that had nearly destroyed us. We're still rebuilding, still healing, but we're doing it together. And I'm no longer afraid of my phone buzzing, no longer looking over my shoulder, no longer waiting for the next attack. I won, not because I destroyed her, but because I refused to let her destroy me. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt pushed out, undermined, or made to feel like you don't belong, leave a comment. Share your story. Let's remind each other that we're stronger than the people who tried to break us.